event. I could not be more thrilled than to convene this fantastic panel of military veteran and spouses who I know I have learned a tremendous amount from already, and I hope to pass along some of their lessons to you as well today. I'm going to give each panelist an introduction. We're going to add them onto the screen. I'm going to be asking lots of questions in order to guide this discussion. And if we have time, we may open the floor to some Q&A, but I will warn you in advance, we've got a lot prepped, so please don't get your hopes up just in case we're unable to get to that. But let's get started. So our first panelist is Sue Hoppen. She is the founder and president of the National Military Spouse Network and the spouse of a retired Air Force officer. Welcome, Sue.
Hi, guys.
Next, we have Stephen Peters, who is a Marine veteran, the spouse of a recently retired Marine, and the Director of Communications and Marketing for the Modern Military Association of America. Welcome, Stephen.
Thanks, Sarah. Great to be here.
Thanks. We have Mallory Sharp, who is a program coordinator and an active duty Air Force spouse of 5 years. Welcome, Mallory. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And of course, I am the moderator. I am also the spouse of an active duty enlisted Air Force an airman for about 5 years. So apologies, Stephen, but in terms of branch representation, we definitely have you outnumbered today. Well, thank you again. And I am going to kick us off with an open question that I hope gets us all warmed up. What motivates each of you to get involved with the political process, whether that's voting, advocating for policies, protesting, or even helping some campaigns? Why do you feel it's so important for you to participate? And I'm going to let Sue go, and then Stephen, and then Mallory.
First of all, thanks so much for convening this conversation, Sarah. I'm really thrilled to be here with you guys, and I appreciate the opportunity. And the Congresswoman, she is such a great leader, and I really appreciate her comments. She clearly understands our lifestyle, so that gives me a lot of comfort. Two answers for you. One, clearly representation, right? As Congresswoman Cheryl said, the number of veterans in Congress, she said, was 20%, is at a low point, which means that less people understand our lifestyle and challenges. So our elected officials need to hear from us. They need to hear what our challenges are and what our experiences are and where the gaps are and where the opportunities are. Our experiences and the solutions that we bring to the table need to be reflected in the policies that are drafted and implemented. We need to be part of that process and drive the change that's needed. And, you know, I think it's as simple as if someone asks you for your advice, if someone asks you for input, give it. I think that's what drives me. I think it should drive everyone, because we might be shy and think that we don't have anything to offer to the greater conversation, and that could not be any less true. We absolutely have something to offer. Second, and this is my guiding principle for everything, is I think that America is best served by an all-volunteer force. And decisions to get in or stay in are usually made around the kitchen table, which means military family issues such as military spouse employment become national security issues. You know, when less than 1% of the population currently serves and less than 8% have ever served, we need to keep all the people we can. And, you know, service members should never have to choose between doing what's best for their nation and what's best for their family. So crafting great policy that allows service members and their families to stay in and continue to serve their country is in the best interest of everyone. And that's what gets me involved.
Well said, Sue. I just add, I really believe that we have a responsibility as Americans to be involved in the political process. You know, democracy only works when we're all engaged in that process, whether that's through voting, which is an absolute must, or through advocating for better policies, helping campaigns, or even, yes, through protesting. Protesting and voting is especially relevant right now, as we've witnessed really some truly horrific things over the last few years, from kids being separated from their families and put in cages at the border, to the gassing of peaceful protesters outside the White House for a photo op, to transgender service members being unfairly targeted for discrimination with a military ban. It's really absolutely critical that we make our voices heard and hold our elected officials accountable at the ballot box.
I'm going to go ahead and echo what both Sue and Stephen have said. I think that our participation is absolutely necessary. And if we don't participate, how are we going to be represented? And if we don't participate, how can we be upset or disagree with the decisions that are made on our behalf? So like Congresswoman Cheryl said, I think our advocacy is necessary and it is powerful. We've seen how powerful it can be.
And she openly invited us to get involved. So like you said, Sue, if someone asks for your advice, don't turn them down.
Right.
In the title of today's event, we made a reference to feel-good photo ops, which are the typical depiction that we see ourselves in when it comes to political and cultural communications. Another term that gets used a lot is reunion porn, which can describe the homecoming videos we all know that can be really beautiful and powerful, but also risk romanticizing what can be a tenuous and even painful transition point. In the meantime, not nearly as much attention is, of course, given to the home departures, let alone any of the time in between. Why is it so important for us who have either formally served or have loved ones who have served and continue to serve, to show our neighbors and fellow voters the less glamorous parts of the lifestyle, the reality of what our lives look as outcomes of policy decisions? What understanding gets lost when our identities are oversimplified to something like a feel-good photo op? And this time we'll start with Stephen, Mallory, and then Sue can take a break from being the first speaker.
Sure, and it's true that those feel-good photo ops don't accurately reflect the complexity of military life. On the other hand, it's a good thing that the public appreciates the service of our troops and the sacrifices that they and their families make. And that appreciation is often on display in those moments. But what does get lost or oversimplified is the truly hard work that goes into dealing with the incredibly complex reality of being separated from your loved one for such long periods of time over and over and over again. It's just in deployment after deployment, service members often spend years away from their families. And what the general public, I don't think often fully understands is that significant amount of time away causes tremendous strain on families and their relationships. It's no wonder that divorce rates for military members who have been deployed are so high. Look, we devote a tremendous amount of resources into equipping service members with what they need to go to war. But we have to do a much better job in ensuring those very same service members really have the tools they need when they come home to reintegrate with their families and with society as a whole. And not just the service member, it's their spouses and their family members. They also need help to work really through those unique challenges and strains.
I think Stephen is spot on. It just overshadows the complexity of being a military family. And when we glorify the homecomings and ignore the separations, we just erase all of those struggles. And we ignore that parent who became a single parent for 6 to 9 months at a time and had to struggle with that daily load of everyday life. And we ignore that that parent had to quit their job because there was no childcare available on base, and you're at an overseas installation where you can't go off base because there's no openings there either. If that spouse had employment to begin with, right? So we're also ignoring the family that's left behind is lacking in commissary savings because of those budget cuts. And they're trying to make it on the single income of an airman, an E3 or an E4, an E5 even. And then we ignore the fact that those returning members and their families are lacking in access to mental health care professionals because we have a lack of mental health care professionals in the military, and we have a lack in the TRICARE network if you're trying to go off base. So these televised and feel-good moments, they're awesome. It's great for people to say thank you for your service and we appreciate you, and I appreciate that, and I'm sure most of us can agree that we appreciate that. But what I'd appreciate more is people having an awareness and an understanding of how these policies affect. us, and how that 7 days at a time and trying to get our families adjusted to having someone not there for those amounts of time, and missing football games and missing sporting events and missing the parent teacher conference, and not seeing how those day-to-day activities are affected.
And I agree with you guys. And I think my fear for all of this reunion porn and all these great opportunities where, you know, like the TV ops and everything, is that I think Americans start to think that that is our experience. Like that is what American families, military families do, is that when there's a homecoming, we're all celebrating. And when there's a, you know, a happy occasion, well, if they're going to graduate, obviously someone's going to fly the mom or dad back in, and it's going to happen at the last minute, when they don't understand that that's the exception, not the norm, right? And that is like, for every person that you see on television, there's hundreds of thousands of other families that don't get to experience that. So I almost think that lets Americans off the hook, because Americans are busy. We're going through a pandemic. Everybody has their own issues. There's job losses everywhere. We're all struggling to feed our families. Why should they care about military families? Especially if they turn on the TV and there's a military family being celebrated, or, you know, they're being given things and they have access to healthcare and all this other stuff. When these reunion, you know, like these shots, these like tiny slivers of our lives start to look like our whole life. And that starts to, for a lot of Americans who don't understand our life, that starts to be representative of what they think our life is. And so, I mean, I love a good reunion video just like anybody else, but I don't run the risk of thinking that's our whole experience. And I worry that everybody else does. And I think that's the fear, is that people just start thinking if this is representative, and it becomes like that yellow ribbon or like the magnet that you stick on your car and forget about it. And I would rather have them really think, if I say I support the troops, well, then what does that really mean? Watching that video doesn't really support anybody, right? I mean, great for that one family, but I hope that Americans really are able to bifurcate like feel-good reunion porn with actual support for the troops and their families.
And one of the unknown or overlooked aspects of the real life, not just that one snapshot, that one sliver, if you're a military partner in particular, is the chronic challenge of and underemployment, which I know has already been briefly mentioned, probably because it's close to home for just about every one of us on this call. But I thought it would be particularly insightful for our audience if we touched on it. You know, like has been mentioned, when you move around a lot, when your partner gets whisked away to work, whether it's a deployment or even if it's not, but just, you know, high ops tempo work too, and all of the caregiving, all of the household responsibilities all of a sudden fall upon you, that can obviously make it really difficult to have a fulfilling career. So much so that some of us have to, I don't know, start our own nonprofits to give ourselves a job, hypothetically. So I know each one of us, like I said, has faced this. And so I'd wonder if we could all reflect on some of the ways in which better understanding might reflect actually better policy. So let's start to demonstrate what would it look like if we were in the room where it happened at the table. I am going to have Sue start, if that's okay, because I know that this is your policy area of expertise, and then we'll go Mallory and Stephen.
I mean, I think I'm interested in hearing Stephen and Mallory's experiences, because like they actually feed right into some of these challenges. And one is the demographics. I think in order for effective policy change passed, you need to understand the demographic that you're hoping to serve. And they can't do that without outdated data. And a lot of the data that is driving a lot of the policies and a lot of the programs that are being introduced in DoD are from a report that was done in 2004, before the advent of the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, before the advent of telework, or before the rise in entrepreneurship with military spouses. So if you're formulating programs based on outdated information, you're not really serving the current force. I was hoping to see Stephen go, yeah, you know, like we just need to really count the numbers of who we have in the force right now, because I think that the policies would actually change. And until we do that, no policy is going to be close to what we need to support our population. The next is understand that military spouse employment issues are different than veteran employment issues. The biggest difference is that by virtue of having transitioned out of the military, veterans are no longer subject to directed moves, unlike military spouses. So generally speaking, that means that military spouses are looking for jobs or moving their businesses every 18 months to 3 years. Effective policy is going to have to take that into account. And when you look at big umbrella programs like we have at the SBA or with entrepreneurship, a lot of those kind of make the umbrella veterans and military spouses and expect our military spouse challenges to be covered by that, which is not true, because veterans, let's just take the example of a new nonprofit or a new business. They have the luxury of being able to build a business like anybody else to scale. A military spouse knows she's going to have to shutter those doors and move that business in 3 years. So they're building businesses that they can scale eventually. But that, so it's a very different experience. And finally, it doesn't have to be difficult. Some of the policies that already exist can be expanded to include military spouses. A prime example of this is expanding the work opportunity tax credit. You just need to include military spouses as a target work group. That would incentivize employers to hire military spouses. Some of the groups that are already included are veterans, rehabilitated felons, and some are youth hires. Surely military spouses rank in there. And I can't wait to hear what Steve and Mallory have to say, so.
Well, I consider myself fortunate because my spouse informed me about the priority placement program early on in our marriage. But I know that I am a minority in that aspect, and not everyone is aware of that program, and not everyone knows that they can utilize that program. I was shocked to find out that the military spouse unemployment rate is 6 times higher than the civilian unemployment rate, and that even when we are employed, our pay is approximately 26% lower than our civilian counterparts. But that we have ways to mitigate these shortfalls when we have such a diverse spouse network with all of these specialties and degrees and licenses. And we have the MyCAA to help people get those licenses, but they have contracted that to by rank. And it was meant to be utilized by everyone. So why can't we open that back up and have that fully funded to extend that to anyone who's looking for those education opportunities? And we have the reimbursement for relicensure now, but it's only up to $500. And it doesn't account for anything other than the monetary compensation. So we're not considering how much time you have to study to relicense in a different state, or study to pass a bar like the Congresswoman mentioned. So we know that we have these ambitious and talented spouses, and we just need to utilize them.
Yeah, I mean, you guys have hit the nail on the head. Almost every military spouse will tell you how incredibly difficult it is to maintain, let alone build a career. Every 2 to 3 years, it's time to move again. And so many of us have to give up our local jobs, if we were lucky enough to get one in the first place, and try to really reinvent ourselves. It's just a constant struggle. But it's also a struggle that makes us very resilient, because we know how to adapt and overcome, even if it's because we had no other choice to do so. While remote work may be ideal, it's often just not an opportunity for many. It's true, we may be facing a new normal of work situations due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but it's still true that those remote jobs are highly coveted and few and far between. They just aren't easy to get, and therefore aren't an option for many. You both talked about, we've done a great job on starting to highlight employment opportunities and preferences, and focus employers on the importance of hiring military spouses. There's a whole host of efforts that have been underway, from the Obama-Biden administration's Joining Forces program and so many others. But we really do have a long way to go.
Sarah, may I add something as well for the other side for the policy? Well stated, Mallory and Stephen, by the way. But I think for the congressional members and their staffers, another way to affect change and also pass good policy is to talk to service members and spouses, right? Like to actually go where they are. And it doesn't have to be difficult. Like I know in October, there's going to be a Congressional Military Caucus Summit. And, they're bringing experts to the Hill virtually, but, so there are existing mechanisms that will allow them to, actually get in front of military spouses and the experts who are working these issues and actually learn, instead of just throwing spaghetti on a wall and seeing what sticks. They can actually listen to what's going on, where the challenges are. So yes, listen to the constituents, but understand that the constituents are they're anecdotes, right? So they reinforce what you think, or they bring an issue to you. But like there are so many military serving organizations and VSOs out there that this is their job. Like this is what they do. They eat, breathe, and these issues. And so they understand the resources, they have the data to back up the policies that are required. So I think that all the elements are there to craft good policy. I don't think that people on the Hill necessarily know where to find those resources. And I think that's a missing piece. And so I would encourage them, whether they use their military fellows or just anybody in their office that has been here for a while, like just look for those resources and reach back to people who understand the issues, instead of just, like I said, throwing stuff on a wall to see what sticks.
And if you're a military spouse that wants to participate in a Storm the Hill, you should take one of our trainings. We talk a lot about how to effectively lobby elected officials. So you're right, Sue, all the tools exist as long as everyone takes advantage. All right, let's have some real talk here. So there are certain assumptions that we're all familiar with that people sometimes have when you tell them that you're affiliated with the military in one way or another, that you must fit a very specific mold when it comes to your beliefs and values. And while we all, to a certain extent, share, of course, a shared commitment to service, when it comes to most of the other stuff, we are as diverse as the communities that we come from. I'll just share one personal anecdote where I came up across this. So last summer, I was in DC. I was walking around with a newer acquaintance, and I was telling her about this project, SFI, how I wanted to advocate for a less militarized, more diplomacy-first approach to foreign policy. And she looked at me quizzically, and she asked with all good intentions, she said, "But don't people join the military because they want to go places and kill bad guys?" And that really stung, because of course families' motivations to serve are not that simple, universal, or frankly aggressive. But that's a stereotype, and that's just one example of course many that exist. But for my own personal edification, for the next time that I run up against this, what advice do each of you have for ways in which we can chip away at some of those stereotypes, and in doing so, reclaim our narrative of what it means to be a military family member? At this point, I will let folks raise their hand when they want to speak, when the power moves you.
I'll go. Well, I mean, you are just 110% correct. While service to our country and supporting our service members builds this common bond, you certainly can't put every military spouse or family into a mold. We just come from all walks of life, from backgrounds and political beliefs, and we truly are as diverse as the fabric of our nation. And it's ludicrous, some of the stereotypes that we've been labeled with, whether they're reinforced through movies or an outright lack of understanding about what military service means. And we have to reclaim our own narrative. And I believe military spouses and veterans really have a crucially important part to play in that. And for example, while service members are often sometimes restricted in what they can and can't say and do in regards to politics, their family members and veterans are free to fully exercise those constitutional rights. And it's no secret that their sacrifices for our country often give veterans and military families a level of credibility and trust and respect by the general public. So we have a tremendous opportunity to persuade others, and often by simply sharing our own stories and how political decisions impact our lives and our families. You don't even have to look any farther than the fight for marriage equality. LGBTQ military partners and spouses, we were key voices in that fight, and we won that fight because we helped to open the public's eyes to the discrimination and disproportionate challenges that we faced simply because our relationships weren't recognized by the military. In the landmark decision ensuring loving and committed same-sex couples finally had the right to marry, I believe it was Justice Sotomayor who specifically referenced how marriage inequality harmed military families. So I say all that to say, military spouses and family members and veterans, we have a powerful role to play in politics and advancing our values as a nation. And we really can reclaim our own narrative.
Oh, go Mallory.
I think that this ties back perfectly to both your initial question of participation and the feel-good photo op questions, because for the civilian population with no ties whatsoever to the military, like Stephen said, where do they get their information? It's from movies, it's from TV shows, it's from this reunion porn that we see online. So they see this patriotism and this, you know, we're hitting the ground running in the boots in the sand, and we're in the war zone, and that's what they see day to day. And they don't see anything else that goes on behind the scenes. So I think that changing the narrative has to start with us becoming involved in our own communities and our own elections and our own policies. And we have to influence how others see us by being involved. Otherwise, we'll always be viewed with these stereotypes that people who have never been in this community have placed on us.
And so I'm going to take like the in the weeds point of view, the every person point of view. And, you know, it's interesting for people of minorities in the military, even for military spouses, it's interesting because people approach you with, you know, preconceived notions. And it was always interesting because they always asked me if I was really grateful that my husband saved me from some kind of life because he married me. And I'm like, well, I just came out of college and like we met in Denver, so I don't know what you're talking about. And so it was really interesting because I felt so inadequate that I thought I had to develop a narrative that fit into what they expected of a military spouse. And it wasn't until I realized that was the exact wrong approach that it started, you know, start to become comfortable in your own skin. And so I think in hindsight, what I would say is don't be shy about sharing your story and experiences, and don't water it down because you think you need to fit into some stereotype or narrative. And that's just from personal experience. We can all make a difference by being willing to have that thoughtful conversation with people who are curious about us. And I think it's not easy. It's not always going to make you popular. But if you come from a place of authenticity, I think that resonates. And they'll walk away with maybe a little bit more curiosity. Like, she's an odd duck. That can't be the norm. Like, let's go talk to some other people and then they start to realize, okay, it's really diverse. Like, you have this odd person, and then you have this, you know, you have this liberal person, progressive person, you have this conservative person. And then I think they, you know, they start to learn that we're diverse, because I don't think we're going to change anybody's minds. Like, I think me sitting in front of someone telling somebody we're diverse, we really are, they're going to be like, okay. I think it's just through experience. And so I think we all play a part in that. It's as simple as just having a drink, having a conversation, and just being your authentic selves, and like, they'll figure it out.
And there's powers in numbers, right? When
Yeah.
we organize together, you show that, yeah, you're not just the exception to the rule.
Yeah.
So last January, tensions between the United States and Iran were sky high, and there were moments where it felt like our country was about to head to yet another war. And I know that that was a flashpoint for a lot of military families that I know personally. There were some who were really concerned about the safety of their loved ones, and a lot of us really felt in the dark about what kind of strategy was driving this administration's actions that felt like it was putting us in such a dangerous position. With that in mind, as we look to the future, what do you all think that principled leadership from the top looks like? And why is it so especially important, especially for military families, that we elect higher ups whose vision and judgment we can feel confident in? And in this case, Mallory, would you like to kick us off? And then we can go Sue and Stephen.
Sure. I think my main word for this and principled leadership is just transparency. I think that as military members and families, we deserve to know our leadership's intentions and their plans and their goals. You know, we have these, if anyone's ever been around like a squadron or a group, the minute that they get into that position, they set out, this is my vision, this is my mission, these are my goals. You know, I have this 30, 60, 90 days. I'm gonna look at this and we're gonna change these things. And it's all very open and transparent. And I think that if we can have that at the squadron level, the group level, why can't we have it at our elected officials level, where we're putting these people into these positions to reflect what we as constituents want? So having that confidence in leadership is essential, because it's the difference in feeling safe and feeling at risk.
Yeah, you are spot on, Mallory. And I thought about the words that came to mind when we thought of principled leadership, and I came up with integrity, character, moral, shared values, servant leadership, and the hubris to surround yourself with and listen to experts and knowledgeable advisors. Like, I think that's what we all want, is the knowledge that the faith that when these decisions are being made, that experts and our generals and our admirals and our senior enlisted advisors are being taken into consideration, right? Because they understand the force, they know what's at stake, and you know, the views of the State Department and everywhere else. I think it's really important for military families to know that we have a commander-in-chief who will act in an ethical manner. We need to be able to trust that decisions are being made in the best interest of the nation. You know, I don't think that people join the military because they have political aspirations. I think they join the military to protect our country and our way of life, and they just want to do their jobs. They don't want to be in the uncomfortable position of having to question the, you know, the decisions of the commander-in-chief. So I think that, you know, principled leadership reflects all those values that Mallory stated and what I just said as well.
Yeah, you're both absolutely right. And I just add that I believe it's really critical that we have elected officials who either truly understand or truly appreciate the impact of their decisions. I mean, leaders who don't just use service members and their families as political props, but know what it means to have your loved one sent off to war, not knowing if you'll ever see them again, or know what it means to have a member of your family risk their very life for decisions that they are making.
And if I can, I'd like to briefly brag on Mallory real quick, because you brought up transparency, Mallory, and I just loved, I know you shared with me how you started a transparent channel of communication between some of the military leadership at your base and spouses and family members directly. And I just loved it when you shared about that, because we're so used to relying on our service member to hand over the information, which may or may not actually happen. And I think that was just a great example of, you know, innovation that you, and initiative and leadership on your part. So gold star, Mallory. We've got a couple questions in the Q&A that look good if the group's ready to improvise. So first, we've got, any thoughts on how to make our stories newsworthy to the public in the midst of COVID-19? I think this is a really good question to ask. And Sue, my turn to brag on you a little bit, because I attended the Storm the Hill training that you hosted and MSN hosted earlier this year. And this was one of those points where you had to be honest and recognize that when we talk about especially issues of unemployment, which now are affecting a lot more Americans than usual based on the economic ramifications of this pandemic, it takes an extra level of nuance to approach an issue without looking insensitive. So anyway, does anyone have any thoughts about ways to kind of break through with newsworthiness about the issues that are so important?
Well, I'd just say that the fact that you're a military family already gives the situation you're dealing with a lot of credibility and newsworthiness, because you're a military family, because a lot of Americans know that we really have a sacred responsibility to take care of military families because of what they sacrifice. So just the fact that you are a military family gives it a lot of newsworthiness. So I just encourage you to go for it, whether it's writing an op-ed or reaching out to a reporter to tell them what's going on with you and how it's impacting you. And I think you'd be surprised how newsworthy that they would consider it.
And I also think that based on what we've heard and what we've tried is start with your local papers. And Stephen, you can back me up and say yes or no, but start with your local papers, because a lot of times the national papers will reach back to the local papers to get their, their articles and their op-eds and such. So don't feel like you need to reach out and start with the New York Times or the Washington Post. Your county paper or something is a good place to place those op-eds, and keep trying. You never know what is going to be of interest. And also don't forget the military outlets, because they also, I mean, it seems like we're projecting to ourselves in a stovepipe, but like other people source the military outlets for content as well. So be persistent, start small, and just keep at it. Persistent and keep at it, same thing, sorry.
I think depending on the stories that this question is posed around, it could be in addition to COVID. Like, I know many deployed members who have been stopped from coming home because of COVID, or are TDY and haven't been able to go, or have had procedures delayed because of COVID and because of the response to COVID. I know personally, my husband had a medical procedure delayed because of this at another military installation. So we're not even allowed to do those sort of things. So it could just capitalize on the circumstances happening.
That's a great point. We've got another question here. Is there a role for parents in advocating for military spouses and their families? Being asked by Diana Clark, who I know is a military mom. Thank you, Diana, for asking that question. What do y'all think? What role can parents play?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's all about empathy and getting people to understand your point of view. And the public can understand what a parent is feeling and dealing with their service member being deployed, or there's the challenges that they're facing. So 110% yes.
Yeah, they're allies. They're our best allies, right? And chances are they have probably lived in their town for longer than the service member or the spouse. So they're a constituency that can also share with their Congress people, like, hey, I'm not personally invested in spouse employment issues, but I care about this issue, so you should get involved and you should vote for this. So absolutely, the more the merrier. This is not one of those things where we are only going to carry the water for ourselves so that less than 1% is going to make anything happen. No. We need all of you.
I tell my mom everything. We have a great relationship, and for others who have a relationship with their parents, I think it's really easy for them to say, I empathize with this. This is my child, and I want to fight for that. And we've seen what parents can do. We've seen what moms can do around this country. So I think why not? Absolutely.
And as a transient constituency, we are always looking for the folks that are more geographically consistent and might have that in. I appreciate you mentioning that, Sue. All right, I think we've got time for one more question, and I'm going to loop in part of what someone asked with the end question that I had prepped anyway, so it'll be a nice little collapsed ending. Oh, actually, sorry, we did have one just come in that's interesting. Because we're an all volunteer military, oh yeah, okay, this is a good question. Because we're an all volunteer military, oftentimes people might not be empathetic because we signed up for it. So I think the extension there with the question is, how do you respond when someone says, but this is what you signed up for? Spoiler alert, I did record a Tidbit Tuesday video responding to just this. So another reason why folks should follow SFI on social media is we do talk about this stuff more regularly. But I am curious to hear from you three. Have you ever faced that? Has someone ever kind of responded with that? And if so, how does that make you feel? How do you navigate it?
Wait, I kind of want to know what Sarah said first.
Well, I basically, okay, my response is no, I did not know that this is what I signed up for. I personally did not grow up in a military family, so the reality wasn't known. But even, there was actually a military spouse I know who grew up as a military brat, and even that didn't prepare her for the experience of being in the military now because of the endless wars that we're fighting. The ops tempo that our families have been expected to shoulder are unsustainable, right? One former commanding officer of ours said that surge has become standard. And I think that really points out how being in the military now is just such an unknown entity, even for previous generations. So it's an epistemic issue from the face of it. But just because, and even as you might know in general, what generally to expect, everyone's experience turns out differently. None of us know what assignments we're going to get or what family circumstances will evolve as it happens. So I don't give a lot of sympathy when I'm told that, but I can at least understand where it's coming from.
I'm going to take the unpopular stance. A lot of times when military spouses tell me that they went to a job interview and they were like totally discriminated against because they're military spouses and the questions, I just come back to them and say, but would you want to work there knowing that that's their stance? Like, if you know that that's the way they feel about military spouses, why do you want to work there? And you know, and I know that might sound cavalier because people are like, well, because it's a job. And I'm like, I think they've already made the decision. I don't think they're going to hire you. And so I don't know how much you staying at the table and continuing to have that conversation is really going to be to your benefit, or they're not listening to you. And so I think if someone says, but you signed up for it, to me, I already know that there's a chip on their shoulder. They have a bias and they're not prepared to listen. I might push it a little bit and say, what do you mean by that exactly? But I just pick my battles, and that doesn't seem like a battle you can win.
Yeah, and so you hit the nail on the head. They just by asking that question, they've already shown where they're coming from, what they're entrenched in, and they're not going to budge. So there's not, I mean, for most instances, you're not going to change their perspective, I don't think. But yeah, you're right.
And if the master communicator says that, I'm taking that to the bank.
I mean, we can try, but
I think with the signed up for it, it's kind of, I believe in leaving everything better than how we found it, right? So just because we signed up for this life doesn't mean that we can't try to make it better. We
Right.
can't try to make it better for ourselves. We can't try to make it better for others. We can't address the issues just because we signed up for it. I can still advocate for changes and betterment in the military and DoD.
Yeah.
That's a great addition. Okay, final question this time for real. So the question we've gotten asked from the audience is, how can we combat the fear of speaking up and the impact that it might have on a military career? And I'm collapsing that with the question that I had prepped, which is just, everyone here in this panel has had the experience either previously or currently today of being married to someone who you love and care about and want to succeed in the military, and knowing that there are lots of horror stories out there about, if I speak up, if I'm too political, what's going to happen? This is one of the biggest hesitancies and fears that we've, of course, heard from folks. So I would love it if we could close on a note where the panel gives advice, kind of course of action. What do you do if this is, it feels like a barrier for you? How can you overcome it?
I'll go first. I would just say, do it. I mean, do it as if your life and your lives and your family's life depends on it, because it literally does. Do it as if the soul of your nation and the fundamental values that we believe in are literally at stake, because they are. I think, to paraphrase what Speaker Pelosi said this week at the DNC convention, do it not just to decry the darkness, but to light a path forward. It's really critical.
Love that. I mean, I would say that, you might be a military spouse, but you're also a member of society. And as Americans, I think it's part of our civic duty to be engaged, to vote and to hold our elected officials accountable. You can't just sit back and let someone else tell your story. But I understand the fear, and I was very worried about that as well. But one thing that we did do was I want to manage expectations between myself and my spouse. And so we would talk about these things, like say, hey, I really want to get involved with this. If it makes you uncomfortable, I won't do it. Not because it's going to get me in trouble, because like we're married and we're making a decision as a team. So I think if you understand your right, left boundaries in terms of comfort zone for you as a family unit, then you can choose to ignore it or not, and then you move forward in the way you want to. And I don't say that because, hey, you're going to kowtow to your service member. Not at all. I think that's just respectful in a relationship where, you understand, because if you think your biggest fear is it's going to impact the other person, we'll have that discussion and see if they care if it impacts them or not. They may not care at all. Or they may say, well, there's certain things that I don't care if you get involved with because it won't affect me at all. But these things are kind of tangentially involved. So if you are going to do it, maybe consider this. And I think it's just being respectful in communications and managing expectations, and then have at it. It's your responsibility. It's your civic responsibility to get engaged.
I think just like Sue said, before you're a military partner or affiliate, you're an American citizen. And there have been way too many people who have fought for your right to vote and to advocate, and for your right to be seen and heard, for you to feel like you can't. So as long as you have that open communication with your spouse and they're fine with it, limitations on participating in politics don't exist for family members. The Hatch Act covers federal employees, and there are AFIs and instructions for all branches that cover military members, but there's nothing for the family. So as long as you and your partner are on the same page, I absolutely, because we have to be heard as military members and families on our own behalf.
I love Maureen's comment in the chat where she's like, my spouse told me to speak up, that he could handle any backlash. She's a veteran, a Gold Star wife, and a Blue Star mom. Nice.
And my best answer to that question is to just say thank you to the three of you, because I think each of you in your own way has answered this question by being out there as bold advocates, as people who speak their minds and their hearts. You each have done a tremendous amount of job in your everyday life, as well as on this panel today, at paving a way for others to do the same, at normalizing civic engagement as in fact a good thing for us to do. So thank you to all three of you for being such awesome examples and for being generous with your time today. I really, really appreciate it.